Yep, Alistair and Francis, welcome. And Matthew will just say a little bit of an introduction here. We'll wait for Francis to come. Right, Andrew. Oh, sorry, Matthew, not Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. Look, just to open, councillors, I'd like to ask Francis just to take us back through the taxation driver for this item. There is complexity here. It's taken staff a while for us to get our heads around it, and I'm sure it's elements here that are quite complex for councillors as well. So I'd just invite Francis, who wears that hat for us internally, and it's part of our annual work to think about taxation generally, just to open there, and then let Alistair just move on to where we've got in the discussions with Panuku and Ports.
Welcome, Francis.
Thank you, Matthew. Through you, Chair. You'll recall that on the 20th of February we briefed the committee on the implications of some tax law changes that are effective from 1 July 2019 that I believed was important that councillors be made aware of, and which was confirmed by a PwC consideration letter which was attached to that briefing. Particularly the impact of those changes is the subject of this item. And the key thing is the discussion about what's called a deemed dividend. So I thought I'd try and explain it in a simple way. Currently, when we transfer property from a CCO at no value, the transaction does not attract tax. So we just transferring a property between the subsidiary, the CCO and council, there's no tax. From 1 July, transferring that same property for no value, as we currently do, will attract tax at 28%. So there's a significant difference. And that it is the tax on the value, the fair value of the amount of the property that was transferred that becomes taxable. Currently, it's not taxable. And you will also note that in paragraph 21 of the paper that was before you today, the ports have stated that their preference is for the waterfront assets, if they were transferred to council, to be at fair value. And that is so that they can recapitalise their balance sheet for the operations. Therefore, in their case, there would be no deemed dividend because they're transferring it at fair value. So that's just to hopefully just clarifies what the difference is and why we talk about this deemed dividend. There isn't one when it's transferred at fair value. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, if I'll pick up the story from where Francis left off. The driver for bringing this issue to your attention was the change in the tax rules. The most likely CCOs or entities within the council group to be impacted was Panuku or Ports. The tax changes wouldn't be the reason to transfer any of that land to council, but it certainly gave it some urgency that if we were going to do it, we should do it quickly. But as Francis has explained, that urgency doesn't exist for Ports of Auckland any longer. So it's staff advice that it's not an issue to be picked up in this annual plan. However, there is a number of issues sort of swirling around control of land on the waterfront and ports land, and this includes, implementation of the city centre master plan. Also, you've got the Upper North Island supply chain work that the central government's doing in the background. It could still be worth having a discussion about ownership and control of some ports land in the future. When it was decided to disestablish ACIL, there was a memorandum of understanding signed with ports. Part of that MOU was that we would have an annual workshop with ports to discuss issues. There's one of those workshops coming up, I think, in February, and the agenda for that hasn't been agreed as yet, but it might be an opportune time to sort of discuss some of these land control issues for ports. But it's staff recommendation, as I say, that we don't need to consult on that as part of the annual plan. Now, talking about Panuku, in November this committee asked staff to go away and get the thoughts of the Panuku board on any potential land transfer. What we're talking about here is the only assets that Panuku actually owns are the Wynyard Quarter land. The rest of the land they work on is still on in council ownership. The Panuku board's had a discussion about this. As staff, have had a discussion with the new Panuku chair, Adrian Young-Cooper. We've also engaged with Panuku staff. In principle, they're happy with the concept of transferring that Wynyard Point land back to council. That would make it consistent with the rest of Panuku's transform and unlock areas which they're working on. It would just mean that they'll need appropriate delegations put in place like the other transform areas to allow them to get on and do their job. I think it's appropriate that that land should be considered for transfer back to council, largely because once the development is complete, a fair chunk of that land will be actually public open space, the Headland Park, etc., and probably council is a more appropriate entity within the council group to own that. There has been a discussion with Panuku around the CBD marinas. The new chair has raised some issues that require some further work to be done on that. The chair's pointed out that Westhaven was originally purchased by Auckland City Council back in the day to maintain public ownership. That public ownership could be maintained by council or Panuku. But there's also issues around the operational management of the marinas down there, including the viaduct marinas, and also around the trust structure. There's a slightly complicated trust structure that owns the berths down there. And there's also issues around the expiry of the seabed occupation licence, which allows those berths to be there. For those reasons, the recommendation in the report is that staff continue to work with Panuku on developing some consultation material for the transfer of these assets back to council. There'll be options around either transferring all the assets or just the Wynyard land assets. Yeah. And we're suggesting that we bring that information back to you so that you can make a final decision on whether to consult or not in February. Happy to take any questions.
And Alistair, just the relevance of the 99-year leases in the Wynyard, I mean, that's obviously...
Yes, so effectively council would step in to be the owner of the freehold, and those 99-year leases or whatever would remain in place. It would just be a different landlord.
Yep. I saw a hand on the left. Was it Councillor Casey? Yes.
Right. Yeah, Alistair, just to be clear, if the governing body meet with ports next year and there is discussion about land transfer, there's still a requirement for public consultation because it's a strategic asset.
Yes, that's correct.
That's good. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Watson.
Yeah, I just wanted to check that the reference to marinas means the marinas across Auckland, not just down at Westhaven. Is that correct? So Gulf Harbour, Hobsonville, Half Moon Bay.
Only marinas we own, but Alistair.
Yeah, and look, the discussions that I've had with Panuku have been about the CBD marinas. I need to go check as to whether, in fact, those other marinas are owned by council and managed on behalf of by Panuku.
Francis has an opinion on that.
I don't think they are. My understanding is they're not. We were only talking about transferring the ones that we don't own.
Yeah.
that Panuco owns.
Yeah, so look, we'll look at all those and
That's okay, John, because we don't know.
Because we do get a dividend from them as well.
Might ask Corey to come up just to clarify here.
Sorry, through the chair, the other marinas you're referring to are owned by Auckland Council.
Yep.
Panuku only manage them. The only one that Panuku owns the West Haven Marina and the Silo Marina beside it.
Well, good, thank you, Corey.
Corey.
Okay, well, I'm happy to move this item, and Member Typer is open to second, and no further discussion. I'm going to put the recommendations. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? And I will thank all the councillors out here making a pleasant meeting, but I can't say every meeting has been pleasant this year, but it's, as always, it is a pleasure to work with all of you, and I say that genuinely, so thank you very much.
That would include me, even though I'm not a councillor.
Oh, and sorry, and of course, Member Honeck and Member Typer.
Oh, look, one and the same, really. Right. Wayne Watson, so I can be.
I will declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
I'll take that as a compliment.